another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe and definitely like and share these videos. You are really bringing up a point with what you're starting right now, and I want you to speak about it.
Of course, this is my topic. I've been talking a lot about this over the last month.
Right.
So it is called Good Cops Only at Game, and it's hashtag Good Cops Only at Game. And the idea is that police officers, when we find these videos, when we see these horrible videos, typically the person being victimized by a police officer in the videos is from the same type of community that produces the best athletes that we have in our country, the professional athletes. And with my background as a sports reporter at 27 NFL stadiums, lots of NBA arenas, and the baseball parks, I noticed police presence. I know it's necessary. But what I tried to do was to bring this problem of police brutality together with a positive incentive, with a positive action that could reduce some of this police violence. So for me, an officer who is accused of over-policing or being overly aggressive or misconduct in that area, that person is not qualified to be the security officer at a high-profile sports event. And I say that because I saw that police officers treated Black people just fine at the games, at the events. But when it's not game day, people from minority communities, Black and brown communities, and the poorer communities that produce athletes, those people are the ones we see suffering harm at the hands of the police. So Good Cops Only at Game disqualifies an officer facing some type of an abuse accusation from working at the games. And I'm calling on athletes I interviewed and even retired athletes, anyone who is interested in reducing this police brutality, to demand from the team owners, the arenas, not to pay an officer facing an abuse charge to come and make sure everybody else is safe at the game.
Talking to two Dallas Cowboys in general. Now, with speaking with all these other athletes that you've done throughout your career, are you trying to focus this on mainly one sport to get it started and then push it into all the other sports, or are you just trying to go full head on into every sport?
Rob, I know I need an entry point.
Yeah.
And in my opening video, I removed my eyeglasses after the remarks that I read. I removed my eyeglasses and I looked into the camera and I said, Dallas Cowboys, I have followed you since 1970. And I said, Dallas Cowboys, you have been a leader. So lead on this. And I also called out the members of the 1995 Seattle Mariners, because that was the team I was covering the first time that the Mariners went to the playoffs. And that season, wow, people fell in love with Major League Baseball in Seattle. Those athletes are still just iconic for the people in the Northwest. And so I called them out as a team. I said, come on, I need you to step up like you did in 1995. So I am looking for an entry point, but I'm taking all comers. I'm still in contact with athletes who are not inside of football or basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to give a shout out to the WNBA, because the Players Association for the Women's NBA has issued a social justice platform which focuses on LGBTQ rights, housing rights, voting rights, and then there's a comma and their document says, and other issues. And so I have reached out to the WNBA as well to say, come on, ladies, let's do this. Insist that when you start your season in 2020, the
Yeah.
officers at your games are only officers who have not been accused of police brutality.
So how do we correct the problem when these people that are the chiefs of the police department and their subordinates know about these issues, but they do nothing about it?
Well, when we think about supremacy and white supremacy and dehumanizing people, uh,
Yeah.
those ideas, those principles don't belong in policing, because what happens is we end up with brutality, we end up with the use of lethal force and stuff like
Mm.
that. How do we solve that? We've got to have reforms. We in some way have to crack the nut, crack the shell of protection, of shielding officers who misbehave, and especially officers who are known to either have white supremacist tendencies or
Mm.
have committed acts that show their belief in white supremacy. But the point you said a second ago about, so we have these videos now, and that people who were not affected were not thinking about police brutality because there was no proof.
Yeah.
It was one person's word against the system, or a family's word against the system. But that makes me think of how wise some people in our country have been. We have had people for generations calling out police brutality, calling out dehumanizing acts carried out against people. And the way this is going to change is that so many more people have the proof. They
Yeah.
can't dispute the proof. Now, I listened to some scholars, quote unquote, just the other day, challenging statistics, and you've heard this, and your audience members have heard this, about who's committing the crime against whom and why is killing this person so terrible when somebody from a Black community is killing another person. Okay, we've heard this forever and forever. But the difference is that we say we have a country of laws, that we have equal treatment under the law.
Mhm.
So why don't we have equal policing under the law? So it's all a smorgasbord of problems at this point. And for me, the reason I'm working on and developed Good Cops Only at Game is that I want to reduce this problem on the front end.
Yeah.
By incentivizing officers to do their jobs the right way means that people don't have to suffer an injury or a death. And it means that we in the public, we don't have to wait to find out the name of the officer in charge. We don't have to wait to see if the grand jury is going to charge. We don't have to see the grieving family member crying on the witness stand. And we don't have to hold our breath to find out whether the verdict is just. The problem is so vast that I've decided to do something on the front end.
Mhm. How many athletes have you spoke to so far? How many have you had committed to this? Because I think it's great because, this is money that these policemen get, and they get quite a bit of money to do detail at these games.
Okay, so here's the deal. I've talked with two former Dallas Cowboys. One of them was on 3 of the Super Bowl winning teams.
Oh, okay.
But these athletes are not ready to make their public announcement about being a part of this, but they've told me that they agree with my principle. One of them, I was asking his opinions, and I said, what do you think is a good way to move the needle, to change the game with police violence? And his idea is that police officers' children should, or any law enforcement officer's children, should qualify for university tuition. However, if that officer is accused of, or even found guilty of, excessive force, that college fund goes away.
Mm.
And so one of the professional athletes who has college-age children said to me that another incentive is to make sure that in the mind of that officer, the risk of losing something that he wants, that she wants, is so great that the person would prefer not to exert his power over the person being arrested. And so who have I enlisted? Well, I've reached out to Matt Ryan, the quarterback
Yeah,
of the Atlanta
Atlanta.
Falcons, because a lot of people know that he has made statements about Black Lives Matter and that it's never wrong to speak up about the right thing. So I have reached out to him. I'm reaching out to Candace Wiggins, the
Oh, yeah.
former basketball player. I think we're distant relatives. And so I'm still going through the family channels to reach out to her. And Bubba Wallace
Right.
from NASCAR. And when I was in the United States, I covered NASCAR. It was one of my beats. And I interviewed Richard Petty a number of times and all of them, you know, all of the superstars in NASCAR. And so I've given a shout out from Europe, not only to Bubba Wallace and NASCAR management, but also to the WNBA, to Matt Ryan, and the Cowboys that I've talked to. I'm asking them to recruit others to come along, because I understand how people are not just leaping because I have an idea. Okay, so I have an idea, but for me, it really has taken me 30 years to get to the point of leaping to try to make something better. And so it's 30 years after my meeting Rosa Parks that now I'm working on police brutality, which was one of her issues.
Right.
So,
Well, your start of this conversation, it was going to lead to a bigger discussion, which hopefully in the end will make something happen. That's obviously the objective. Because I've talked to a couple of people about reform. We talk about community policing, making sure that these policemen are out in the communities, especially these, you know, a lot of the communities that have a lot of crime in it, that they're out talking to these people. So, you know, so they can create that trust. If you don't trust policemen, then you're gonna run away from the cop, and then, you know, the cops do whatever the heck they do, which I don't agree with when somebody's running away, but that's my opinion. But in general, so with the community policing, more women in the police force, would you think the two of those things would also more people of color in the police force, those three things, would you believe that that would make any changes or no?
I believe in woman power. However, as I have to admit that a woman can be as flawed as a man
Right.
sitting on top of an office or a department. And so, sure, of course, we do need more women in policing and in law enforcement. But having a woman in charge doesn't necessarily clear up the problem, because we've seen how some of these departments where we've had these awful videos, some of those departments have had female police chiefs. I believe Baltimore, at the time of Freddie Gray, had a female police chief, and Atlanta. So, what we need is more humanity. And I don't know that you can see my shirt today, but I'm wearing a shirt that says "Listen to others as you would have them listen to you." And so it's policing could follow that principle and improve itself. If Officer Derek Chauvin had been listening to the words of Mr. Floyd when Mr. Floyd was being restrained, if the officer had envisioned that someone he cared about was in that disadvantaged position, the outcome may not have been what we now know that it is. And so we've got to get to an individual accountability to make a change in policing. And as far as good cops only at game, the accountability will land at the desk of the owners, because it is my vision that when enough of these athletes and retired athletes, through their players associations, tell the league and the owners in the league that we do not accept paying any money
Hmm.
hiring anybody who's been accused of brutality.
Right.
When those people make a stand and put the accountability on the owners, then we and the public can get what we want. And that's why I thank you for taking time to let me talk about this, because I've got to get the word far and wide. And anyone listening can contact his or her favorite player or team and leave a message, good cops only at game. So interviews and the opportunity to explain this helps me to get the project done.
What are you seeing in France? Do you see a lot of, the same amount of police brutality in France as you have in the U.S., or is it less? And what are they doing in France to combat this? Anything or no?
Well, first of all, you probably are referring to Adama Traore, who is
Probably.
a man who died in police custody.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
His sister is an activist calling attention to police brutality. That is how she spends a lot of her energy. And
Mhm.
when people saw those protests in France at the time of Mr. Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, it was Madame Traore, the sister, who had brought a lot of the crowd together. So what are they doing to combat that? Well, the Interior Minister, a man named Christophe Castaner, was was interviewed quite a bit about this topic, especially in conjunction with Mr. Floyd's death. And he did say that there is no racism in the French law enforcement system. The typical line that a manager gives to defend the work being done. But that is not the case, because I'll give you two examples. At the time of our lockdown for the coronavirus, in the poorest minority area, living area, neighborhood,
Hmm.
that's where most of the tickets for violating the rules of the lockdown were written. How is it that the police decided that to police and over police that area, and that population, it's called Saint Denis, actually has a lower population, a smaller population than most of the other neighborhoods? We have 20 arrondissements, or 20 neighborhoods. Well, surprise, the minority poor area had the most tickets during the lockdown. This is not accidental. There's no way people can think of this as something that just happens. And the other question that comes up that Mr. Castaner was asked, this leader of the law enforcement, he was asked about the minority men and women who are directors of different law enforcement agencies. They don't exist. They don't have them.
Yeah.
Somehow, minority people aren't interested in the highest paying jobs in law enforcement. Somehow, and they obviously just aren't qualified, or they just don't apply.
Right.
This is what we hear in the United States. So what we see in the United States and the UK, we have it in France. It's what happens. It seems to be the game. It's the game.
Nita, I hated that we had to end on a down note with that, but I love having you on. I really appreciate having you on, and it's like, for me, listening to you, it's like I'm in my favorite class in college again. And I'm not trying to pump you up. I'm trying to tell the truth. I love learning myself. I love reading, and I know a lot of the viewers that have listened to you really enjoy what you have to bring to the table, and it's really refreshing, a lot of the stuff that you speak about. So thank you so much again. It means a lot.
Thank you, Rob, and I look forward to the next conversation.